How did my February reading go? Stay tuned and find out. Hello book friends, I'm Jen and welcome to my reading life and welcome to my February reading wrap up. February was a pretty good reading month for me and I read quite a few books. Considering there are only 28 days in February, I read a total of 22 books in February, which I know that sounds like a lot. However, 4 of them were children's books, like children's picture books, and 1 of them was a DNF. So that number is a little bit skewed if you look at it that way. However, I did read quite a few books in February. I had a number of books that I really loved, and I had quite a few books that I enjoyed. They weren't the best books I've ever read, and then I did have a few disappointments. But let us not dilly-dally. I'm going to give you some stats about my reading month first, and then let us dive straight into the books. I have my handy dandy notebook here. The total number of books I read, as I said, was 22. Of those, I read 12 books off of my physical bookshelf that I have owned since before January 1st of this year. And then I did also read 1 audiobook, which had been on my audio TBR since before January 1. And also I had it on my Kindle. So I kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone with that one. I did check out and read 5 library books. And I read 3 new books that have come into my life since as of January 1st of this year. And I'm feeling good about that. And then as I mentioned, I did DNF 1 book and I did reread 1. I have a second one that I think technically counts as a reread, but it had been so long since I had read it that I remembered very little, if nothing, about it. And so I'm sort of counting it as a new read as well. And then I did check off my 4 main goals that I want to get to each month, which is to read a nonfiction, a classic, a book off of my Kindle, and a mystery. And I will indicate which books qualify for those particular categories when I get to them. But I do just want to get into the books because, as I mentioned, there are a lot. In general, I am going to go through the books sort of in the order that I enjoyed them and end with my favorite books of the month. But I am going to start off with the picture books that I read and just talk about those separately because they sort of feel like their own little category of books because it's just a completely different genre from adult novels, even from middle grade books or young adult books. I just feel like children's books kind of stand on their own. So I thought I would talk about them separately. First off are the 3 books that I read from the Brambley Hedge series. I have just discovered Brambley Hedge and I am addicted and I am a huge fan now. I think they are so charming, so lovely. I wish I had known about them sooner, but I know about them now. And I do think I'm going to purchase a collected volume of all the Brambley Hedge books because these 3 that I read are the only ones that my county library system has physically. So I would really like to have all the stories. I believe there are 8 stories in total, and it would just be lovely. And there are some really beautiful bind-ups of the Brambley Hedge books, but I have read now Spring Story, Sea Story, and Winter Story. And then because I was reading these and talking about them, the lovely Kate Howe mentioned there is a little TV series based on the books that you can watch on YouTube. And I have started to watch that and it is just delightful. It's like stop motion animation and it uses Jill Barklam's illustrations and it is just the coziest, loveliest little series. And I'm just enjoying it so much. And then the other children's picture book that I read was Miss Rumphius by Barbara Cooney. And this is a book that Barbara Cooney both wrote and illustrated. She is very prolific as an illustrator. She hasn't written as many children's books, but her illustrations are just beautiful. Let me find one of my favorites for you. Actually, I love this one where she's in bed with her cat. Just so cozy. There she is by the seaside. And I really just love the theme of this book, which is to make the world more beautiful. And that's just such a lovely idea and such a lovely thought to instill in children, that to do something that makes the world more beautiful, whatever that might be. It might be just a small thing like planting some flowers, and it might be something really, really big, but you can do your little bit to make the world more beautiful. And I just love that. And I am looking forward to getting to more of Barbara Cooney, both just the book she illustrated, as well as the other picture books that she wrote. Very, very lovely. Now let us get into the books in the order of enjoyment. And first up, of course, is going to be the book that I DNF'd in February, and that was Off Balance by Mary Sheepshanks. And this was yet again another book that I had put on my 25 in 2025 TBR, and I DNF'd it. I think this is the 5th or 6th book off of the books I pulled for my 25 in 2025 to read that I've DNF'd. That is not a good ratio. I'm actually considering just doing a big try a chapter of a number of the books that I've pulled that I'm unsure of, and that I think might possibly just be books that I need to unhaul. So that might be coming. But Off Balance is the story of a family. It's a husband and wife and their 2 kids, and they own a fairly large home, and that has a separate kind of like a barn stable sort of building that they had been turned into a theater long ago. And now that the husband's father has passed away, who previously owned their property, they are renovating the theater. And in the midst of all this, the wife's sister is coming to visit, and they have a very, very strained relationship. And I got about 50 pages in, and I didn't like any of the characters. None of them had any real redeeming qualities. The sister's relationship was strained for reasons that didn't make a ton of sense. It was like just childhood resentments that had festered over time, but just felt blown out of proportion. And then the husband and wife, their son has what appears to be autism or something on the autistic spectrum. And the way it's dealt with in this book, and again, this book was written back in, let's see, when was this written? 2000. And, you know, what we knew about autism then has certainly changed over the past 25 years, but it was very off-putting to me, and I just didn't want to read anymore. So I DNF'd it. I'm going to unhaul it, and maybe somebody else will enjoy it, but I did not. And then next was my nonfiction pick for February, and that was Enchantment by Catherine May. And the subtitle of this is Awakening Wonder in an Anxious Age. And I read Wintering by Catherine May a couple of years ago, and I really, really enjoyed it. I slow read it, and I read each of the chapters. It starts, I believe, in September and goes through, I want to say like February or March or something. And it kind of talks about each of the months. And I really enjoyed it, and I read it sort of each chapter in the month it was written about, and that really worked for me. Enchantment, I believe, came about as a result of sort of the pandemic and Catherine May's feelings about that time. And I actually listened to this on audio, and I mean, I'm kind of glad I did it that way, because I might have DNF'd this if I had read it instead of listened to it. But nothing in it felt very revelatory to me, and I was sort of hoping there would kind of be like tips and ideas for like how to be less anxious in our current times, and it didn't really feel to me like the things she was talking about were things that were relevant or would work in my personal life. And it was okay. There were maybe a few little nuggets here and there, but again, I didn't love it. It was fine. It was fine. And then next up was a book that I purchased in January and read in February, because that is my goal, to read books that I've purchased within a month or so of purchasing them. And so I read Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. This is my second Elizabeth Strout book. I always forget the name of it. Anything is Possible? I think that's the one I've read from her other series. And in Olive Kitteridge, we follow Olive Kitteridge and quite a few of the other people in her community and in Maine. And she is quite an abrasive character and really challenging to like. And the chapters, I know a lot of the chapters were published as like short stories in different publications. And it does have sort of a vignette feel to it. But because Olive is the main thread throughout the majority of the stories, I just had a really hard time liking this because Olive was so hard to like. And while I did have some compassion for her at different times, I just wanted Olive to be able to have some self-reflection, and she doesn't. She's not able to see herself as other people see her, and she feels very put upon because of that. And, you know, when I read the other Elizabeth Strout book, again, I liked it, but I didn't love it. There is a sort of strain of what I can only describe as melancholy going throughout Elizabeth Strout's writing. She's a beautiful writer. I will give this 5 stars for the writing of it. And there were a lot of characters to love in this book, and a lot of the sort of smaller plot lines I really was invested in. But overall, I can't say I loved this because of Olive, which is so, you know, problematic because she's the title character. And yes, so not a fan. In fact, I'm not even sure I'll read any more Elizabeth Strout. I appreciate what she does as a writer. I just don't think she's a writer for me personally. But if you don't mind a strain of melancholy, if you don't mind characters that are inherently unlikable, then maybe give this a try, because there is a lot to love in here. I just overall didn't love it. Then next up, I read 2 books about Audrey Hepburn, and neither of them were complete winners for me. And the first one was this graphic novel that I picked up at the end of last year, Audrey Hepburn. This is by Michelle Botten and Dorlis Giacchetto. And the illustrations in this are just beautiful. I mean, really, really lovely. And that was my favorite part of the book for sure. And this is not a good book to start with if you don't know anything about Audrey Hepburn, because it's not telling a linear story of her life. So you sort of get flashbacks and flash forwards, and you sort of hop around, and you don't get to see her fully fleshed out. And I didn't think Michelle Botten's portrayal of Audrey in this felt true to me from what I know about her. Now, I know her son Luca Dotti was involved in this book and gave his blessing on it, I believe, but I don't know. To me, it didn't work. So, while of course I will keep the book because it is beautiful to look at, the story itself, I think there are better biographies about her out there, and I'd really love to read one written by a woman, because so many of the biographies about Audrey Hepburn are written by men, and I really feel like that skews the lens at which we view Audrey. I just think it'd be refreshing to have a female perspective. So there you have it. And then the next book about Audrey Hepburn, which is one that a few people mentioned when I did my Audrey Hepburn video. And if you haven't seen that video, I will link it in the cards and in the description box below, so you can check that out. But many people mentioned this book, which I had actually started on audio. I had checked it out from the library, and then it got returned before I finished it. And then I just never ended up going back to it. The lovely thing about Libby is when you recheck a book out, it starts you at exactly the spot where you left off previously, which is a fantastic feature. So I did finally finish reading Dutch Girl, Audrey Hepburn in World War II by Robert Matson. Okay, again, I'm going to say the same thing about this as I just said about the prior graphic novel, is that again, we're getting a very male skewed perspective of Audrey from this book, and I think I'm just maybe a little bit tired of that, and I would like to see her portrayed from a female perspective and just have that lens put onto her life. Aside from that, this book really does just focus on what was going on and happening in Audrey's town and to the Dutch people in World War II, more so than it's a focus on Audrey Hepburn's life specifically. So she's sort of a character in this, and probably the main character, but you're getting to see a bigger scope of what was going on in World War II. So I did enjoy kind of really getting a gripping feel of what her life was like during World War II, which was unique, and I appreciated that about it. But again, right towards the end of the book, there are some things that the author states about Audrey that I didn't wholly agree with. And again, just felt a little skewed in their view of her. So take that all with a grain of salt. I'm a huge Audrey Hepburn fan, and I feel like I have a personal investment in her. And so sometimes I take things too much to heart, but be that as it may. So, I mean, I definitely think if you want to know about what happened to the Dutch people during World War II, this is an excellent book to try, because it was just as horrendous as some of the other atrocities the Nazis put onto other peoples during World War II. And then next up is another nonfiction book, which is, I mean, it's always sort of viewed as a middle grade book. That's how I've always thought of it, though it might read slightly older than middle grade, but I think middle grade kids could read this and enjoy it. And I actually buddy read this with my friend Barbara, who has the new podcast that just started this year called Librotique, and I will link that in the description box below if you'd like to check it out. It's a very lovely little podcast. But Barbara and I read Cheaper by the Dozen, which is by Frank B. Gilbreth Jr. and Ernestine Gilbreth Carey, and this is the story of the Gilbreth family. There were 12 children in the Gilbreth family, and their father, who was an efficiency expert, and their mother, who was formidable in her own right and well educated and smart. And this book is really just, again, sort of interconnected vignettes about the family's life, particularly with their father, who did make me quite crazy reading about sort of the chaos that their lives were like as a result of their father. It's not to say there weren't some very funny moments in here, because there are. The car that the family owns just sounds hilarious. And I really do want to watch the classic movie Cheaper by the Dozen, just because I think that would be really fun. But overall, I found the father to be very grating after a while, and I can't imagine what it would have been like to grow up in that family. I mean, obviously, I come from a family of 2 kids. I have 1 son myself, so very small family units compared to the 14 people which are in this family in total. And so while it was very eye-opening as to what it might be like to live in a family that large, I can also tell that it would not be for my personality. It would just be exhausting. I need time alone and time in the quiet, and I don't think there was ever a quiet moment in their house. So I'm glad I read this, and I really do want to watch the movie. You know, cute, fun, but the father was annoying. And then next up is the pick for the Cozy Reader Book Club that we read in February. I co-host the Cozy Reader Book Club with my friend Rebecca over at Rebecca Wilson Hill. Definitely go check out her channel. It is lovely. And this month we read A Company of Swans by Eva Ibbotson. And this is a story about a young girl. Her name is Harriet Morton, and she lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1912, and she is not treated well by her family. Her father and her aunt, her father's sister, is whom she lives with. Her mother has passed away when she was very, very little. And really, they are just horrible to her. They don't let her do anything. They don't let her go anywhere. They won't let her study. They won't let her read books. The one thing they do let her do is take dance lessons. And so I think they think she's maybe doing like social dancing lessons, but really she's taking ballet classes. And as a result of this, a man who is taking a ballet troupe to South America sees her and wants her to join the company and go with them as part of the ensemble. And at first, of course, the father and aunt say absolutely not. And then Harriet runs away, basically, and joins the ballet troupe. And we follow her to South America and into the Amazon, and there her life just sort of slowly unfolds, but there is this ever ominous presence of her family perhaps tracking her down. And this definitely had the feel, when we discussed it in the Cozy Reader Book Club, of like a fairy tale or almost like a ballet being played out. So we don't necessarily get a lot of in-depth detail into the characters, and things happen kind of rapidly. There is a romance that happens in here, and so but I think what Eva Ibbotson was doing was not trying to make something that felt wholly realistic, but giving us that sort of fairy tale storybook quality to it, which she definitely did. And I enjoyed this. It definitely made up for the ballet book we read last year for the Cozy Reader Book Club, which nobody liked, which was just, it wasn't good. But this one was fun. We had lots to discuss in it. And I definitely, if you're looking for a book, it didn't have a ton about ballet. Like, I could have used more of that, though the people in the group who read it who aren't really that interested in reading books set in the ballet world said it was plenty of ballet information for them. So again, take that as you will, but this was a good read, and I'm looking forward to reading more by Eva Ibbotson. And then next up is a book by an author who is quickly becoming a favorite of mine, and that was Vintage 1954 by Antoine Lorrain. This is a French novel, so a translated book, and I really enjoyed this. This was very, very fun. The general premise of the story is that there are 4 individuals who come together and share the same bottle of wine, this vintage 1954 bottle of wine, and it transports them from 2017 back to 1954, and then they have to figure out how to get back to 2017. So it is basically all of them trying to do that. They sort of, when they kind of wake up in 1954, all of them are separated and they quickly come together and they are working on getting themselves back. But in the meantime, they meet some sort of famous French people. Actually, Audrey Hepburn shows up in this one, so that was lovely. We also meet Edith Piaf in this, and I believe there are a few other famous French people from 1954 who weren't as familiar to me, but who show up in the book. So that was kind of fun that they sort of run into these famous people. And I just overall really, really enjoyed this. And it's not my favorite by Antoine Lorrain. That's still going to be The Red Notebook. Nothing has surpassed that yet. But this one is definitely a close second to that one, and I am very much looking forward to reading more by Antoine Lorrain, and I definitely recommend this if this kind of time travel, it's not sci-fi at all. It feels very much like a French novel, so don't let that put you off. It was very, very fun, and I enjoyed all of my time in vintage 1954. And then next up was my Agatha Christie mystery for February, and that was Mrs. McGinty's Dead. And this is a Poirot mystery, and in this, Mrs. McGinty has been dead for a number of months. Somebody has actually been convicted of her murder. It was her lodger who was living with her. But the police detective who was assigned to the case doesn't think this guy did it. And he comes to see Poirot and asks Poirot if he'll go down to the village where Mrs. McGinty lived and see if he can suss out what really happened. Whether it's to prove that, yes, the guy they have convicted and are about to execute really did it, or if someone else did it. And so Poirot does that. And I really like this sort of twist on the murder mystery, where it's something that's a bit of a cold case, and Poirot is also under time pressure because this man is going to be executed, and so he needs to figure out, does he deserve that or not, before it actually happens. So you kind of feel that. The one thing I will say about this novel is that you can definitely tell this was written later in Christie's career when she was getting very tired of Poirot. Ariadne Oliver shows up in this one as well, and Ariadne Oliver is often mentioned as sort of the closest of the characters that Christie wrote to Christie herself. And Ariadne Oliver is a novelist, a mystery novelist, and she has a detective who she absolutely loathes. And she goes into great detail as to why. She wishes she'd never written him, and it is very clear that this is Agatha Christie wishing she'd never written Poirot, which is too bad because I do love Poirot. But we also get a lot of Christie focusing on all of Poirot's little fussy little mannerisms and things that he does, and you can just tell that she was sort of over it at this point. But I still enjoyed this mystery. I was turning the pages to figure out who done it, which I didn't figure it out until it was revealed. And then I actually watched the Poirot episode of this book, and that was really fun to do as well. And I'm going to do that going forward with all the Poirot books that I read. I'm going to read them, then I'm going to watch the Poirot episode with David Suchet because he's the best Poirot that ever was. And then next up was a book which I picked up because I just thought it would be lovely to have something sort of romantic for February with Valentine's Day and everything. And this is a book that I've had on my shelf. I think I was gifted this way back in my early 20s, and I read it when I first got it, but I haven't read it since, and I don't remember all that much about it. And that is Love Letters, an anthology of passion. And this is, does it say who this is edited by? I always forget. Yes. This is edited by Michelle Lovric, and she has pulled together quotes from famous people throughout time, just excerpts of their love letters to the people that they love, and lots of people whose names you recognize in here. It was very fun that Edith Wharton shows up a number of times in here, and the book is broken down into different sections like devotion, passion, marriage, possession, different things. So all of the excerpts have to do with that specific topic on those pages. And then of course it's one of my favorite kinds of books, which has sort of that multimedia aspect where you have letters you can actually pull out of the envelopes and read, and they are reproductions of the original letters. So it is the original author's handwriting, and if there was a seal on the envelope, here's one with a seal. They have recreated the seal exactly as it was on the original letter. So that is really kind of fun. And yes, I just thoroughly enjoyed this. I thought it was a fantastic collection of excerpts from letters. And if that's something that sounds appealing to you, then I think you can still get your hands on this book. But I will link it in the description box, as I will link all the books in this video. But definitely go check it out because it's really lovely. Unfortunately, my little envelope on the front has broken off. So really it's supposed to be like this, and I should probably glue it back on at some point, but I don't want to make it worse. So, and I don't want to ruin the actual cover, so I just have it tucked in there. Next up are the books I read this month that I really enjoyed. I loved all of these books. I think they're all fantastic, and I recommend all of them. And first up is the book that we read for our Gilded Age buddy read group that I am a part of, and that was The Glimpses of the Moon by Edith Wharton. And this is actually a bit lighter, a bit frothier of an Edith Wharton book. It feels almost kind of Great Gatsby-like in its tone. In this, we are following Nick and Susie. Neither of them has much money. They have just recently gotten married, and it is a bit of a marriage of convenience. They are hoping that they can use their sort of honeymoon first year of marriage as a way to sort of sponge off of their friends and stay in all these different luxurious homes in different places in Europe. And but there is also some love going on underneath them. But then some things happen which tear Nick and Susie apart, and we spend the bulk of the novel seeing if they are or are not going to end up together. And I thought this was just fantastic. Susie is a fantastic female character. Really loved her in this, and I just thought she and Nick seemed well matched. There are lots of very colorful side characters, and this was just fantastic. And as always, discussing it with my Gilded Age buddy read friends was just a delight. So definitely recommend this one. And next up was another classic book, and this was my classic pick for February, and that was The Scarlet Pimpernel by Baroness Amuska Orczy. Phew, I have such a hard time saying her name. And I'm sure you have probably heard the title of Scarlet Pimpernel, even if you've never read it yourself, you're probably somewhat familiar with it. It takes place during the French Revolution when all of the French aristocracy are being guillotined. And the Scarlet Pimpernel is a British person, they don't know whom, and he is rescuing these aristocratic French people and taking them to safety in England. And there is a man from France who's sort of in charge of, you know, rounding up these people, and he is on a quest to find the Scarlet Pimpernel. And in the midst of all this, we follow Marguerite, and she is married to Sir Percy Blakeney, and she very much loves him, but their marriage is fraught, even though they haven't been married for very long, and there is something that has come between them, and you sort of follow what happens to Marguerite throughout the story. And I will say it took me a couple of chapters to get into this, but once Marguerite comes on the scene, the story and the action just take off, and it escalates so quickly, and it is so full of intrigue and adventure, and I could not turn the pages fast enough, and I was fully invested from chapter 3 till the end, and I'm so glad that I read this. Thank you to Beth from Small Home Comforts for sending this to me. She sent this in my gifted winter Small Home Comforts book box, and I absolutely love this. I don't think I ever would have picked this up if it hadn't come in my book box, and I highly recommend it. It is a relatively short classic, so if you are looking for a classic to read that you could definitely get through just in a few days' time, this is the one to pick up. Definitely a page turner. I really, really loved it, and now I need to watch the movie because I've heard nothing but wonderful things about it, so that's also going on my to-watch list. I feel like a lot of books this month have turned into things I would now want to watch. And then next up is a middle grade book, and that is the next book in the Little House on the Prairie series, and that is Little Town on the Prairie by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And once again, I listened to the audiobook read by Cherry Jones, and it was just as lovely as all the other books in the series. And in this book, we see the Ingalls children growing up and sort of starting to go off and go their own ways in life and forge their own paths. And I believe the next book is really going to take us forward in that same direction. But I just enjoy my time with the Ingalls family so very much. And I'm going to be so sad when I'm done reading all the books because I only have 2 more to go after this, and then I have a little middle grade book of Laura Ingalls Wilder's letters to her husband. And then I'm going to be done, and it will be sad. But I'm definitely going to maybe try to find some other Little House adjacent books to read. So if you have any recommendations for those, let me know, because I have a feeling I'm going to be missing my time on the prairie. Though I do think I am going to, I started rewatching the old TV series, and I know that they're making a new version of it for Netflix. So maybe that will help bridge the gap for me. Okay, whew. Only a few more to get through. Next up was a reread for this month, and of course I had to reread The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon Volume 2 by Beth Brower for my Emma M. Lyon read-along, and I am just loving Emma. Of course, as you can see, I tabbed up some of the wonderful little passages in here, and it was just fun to spend more time with Emma. I don't want to give anything away in this because you really do need to read these in order, but it's still not too late to join my read along for the year. We are reading volume 3 in March, so you can easily catch up with volumes 1 and 2. They are quite short, and these are books that I just race through these. I don't think it takes me more than a day or two to read them fully, but they're just so much fun. And then next is a book that has been on my Kindle for a really long time. So I get to check this off my Kindle TBR. And then a couple of years ago, I purchased a physical copy of the book, and I'm so glad that I did because I absolutely love this, and that was Clooney Brown by Marjorie Sharp. This is the second Marjorie Sharp novel that I have read, and it is definitely my favorite. I loved Clooney Brown. She was so much fun. I think this was just exactly the right book at the right moment. I just wanted something fresh and light, and Clooney is just a woman who, she just wants to do what she wants to do. She doesn't want to do what society says she should be doing. And if she wants to take herself to tea at the Ritz, then she wants to do that. But her uncle, whom she lives with, she's an orphan, and she's lived with her aunt and uncle for a long time. Her aunt has passed away, and her uncle is sort of beside himself as to what to do with her. And so he ends up pushing her to go into service. And so she is sent out to the English countryside to this manor where she is going to work as a maid there. And because she's Clooney Brown, she just gets herself into all kinds of of interesting situations. And the ending of this was just a delight and really just a surprise in the most wonderful way. So I highly recommend this. I think if you like things like D.E. Stevenson and Molly Clavering and The Diary of a Provincial Lady and Angela Thirkle, things written in those sort of early 20th century English interwar years, which this is, you know, you will very much enjoy Clooney Brown. And yeah, I loved her. And then I have 3 remaining books, and these are by far and away my favorite books of the month. And the first is the next book in the Mrs. Polifax mystery series, which is A Palm for Mrs. Polifax by Dorothy Gilman. And in this, we see Mrs. Polifax off at a Swiss health resort of sorts, and she is supposed to be there because they believe that somebody is smuggling plutonium through this health resort, and she's sort of there to keep her eyes out and see what's going on. And of course, things escalate as they always do in a Mrs. Polifax novel, but it's just so much fun to go along for the ride with her, and I just adore this series. I can't say enough good things about it, and if you need something very fun, like a bit of a spy thriller, but in the lightest possible way, give Mrs. Polifax a try. And then these next 2 books, they just have a new special place in my heart, and I absolutely love them. They just reconfirm even more why D.E. Stevenson is one of my absolute all-time favorite authors now. And that is the 2 books in the duology featuring Belle Lamington. The first book is called Belle Lamington, and the second is Fletcher's End. I just loved these books so much. I loved every single character in them. I love Belle Lamington. I thought she was a wonderful protagonist. She's a little unsure of herself. She is a young woman. She's orphaned, and she is living in London and trying to make her way in the world. And life feels very precarious for her. But she really misses, she had lived up until fairly recently in the countryside with her aunt, and then her aunt passes away. So she has to come to London to make her living. And you just really feel for this girl who really shouldn't be living in London. She needs to be out in the countryside somewhere where she can have a garden and take her daily walks. And, you know, you just want all these good things for her. And it's just so absolutely charming to follow along with her and see what happens to her in her story. I'm not going to say a single thing about Fletcher's End, other than I absolutely adored it. And if you like books where a home is central to the plot, then you will love Fletcher's End too. But definitely read Belle Lamington first. Absolutely love this duology. I cannot sing its praises enough. They're definitely going to be on my favorite books of the year. Fantastic. And that is it. Oh my goodness, this has taken forever. Thank you for sticking with me if you made it this far. I really do appreciate it because that was a lot of books to get through. I would love to chat with you in the comments. What did you read in February? What were your favorite books? Was there anything you read that you really didn't like? Let's chat all things February reading in the comments below. And if you did make it this far, but you don't have anything that you'd like to add in the comments, if you'd like to leave me a little emoji, let's do a heart, or that little, I think there's a little envelope that has a heart on it, since I did read the Love Letters book, so that might be kind of nice. Or you could do just a letter or an envelope or a mailbox or something to indicate love letters. Why don't you leave that little emoji down in the comments? Comments really do help my channel, and I really love seeing that you were here, that you made it this far. It's just so lovely. And if you enjoyed this video, if you could hit that like button and subscribe if you aren't already subscribed, I would love to have you join my bookish community. And as always, I will be back with another video very soon. Bye!